Hello, everybody. Here's Melly Moore, and welcome on the ADHD Melly Show. Today, we will be with Cathy, and we're going to talk about managing ADHD in the workplace. Because, like we talked last week, it's sometimes hard to find a career that's going to help us being a great person and show our qualities to employers. Sometimes it's quite hard, to just put ourselves there. And sometimes we need to learn how to manage our ADHD to be able to have a great career and be able to work like a normal person. So that's why we're going to talk about that today. And before we start, I want to tell you that next week I'm going to launch an Indiegogo campaign. So if you want to help support the ADHD Melly Show, you will be able to donate as much as you want to help the ADHD Melly Show thrive. So I'm going to share you in the comment the preview page if you want to put your email and subscribe to the newsletter so you'll know when it's launching. So please welcome Cathy right now as she's coming. Hey, how are
Hello.
you?
Hi.
Hello. So how are you doing today?
I am great. It's Friday. It's the end of the week. Doing good. Thanks for having me, Melly, and thank you for all that you do for our community. Happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you too. I'm so
Thanks.
excited to have you and talk about managing ADHD because you told me that you were diagnosed late in your 40s, right? Can you talk a
Yeah.
little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. My diagnosis came at a point where I was gifted this beautiful child at the age of 40. I became a mom and I went back into the corporate world when she was only 5 months old. And that decision was, the driver in me, the go-getter. We can do this. We can be a mom and raise a child and go back to, the grind of 9 to 5. And I couldn't keep up. And a year and a half after having her, I found myself in the doctor's appointments all the time with, different concerns about stress, burnout, memory issues, a lot of memory issues. And my doctor constantly hinted at, we should check ADHD. We shouldn't rule out ADHD. And for me at the time, I was naive. I didn't know anything about ADHD other than it's you have it as a child or that you have to be hyper. So I really fit that cliche of understanding what it is. And then when I saw the questionnaire and the assessment, it was mind-blowing, and all of the things that were in there were all ADHD, interrupting people, not finishing tasks, the list goes on.
Yeah, for me it
So
was a little bit easier to find out because I have the age, and hyperactive. Like you can see, I'm talking a lot, so people notice. Then I always talk, and sometimes I can interrupt people. I'm trying my best, as the host of a TV show. I cannot do that. So I have to learn some tips to just get down and just listen to the other people who are talking to me, right? So if we go before you have a daughter, you had a career where, right, you were working. Nothing was odd for you or feeling odd compared to the other person you were working with?
yeah, great question. So I did that reflection of, well, how did I even get here if this is ADHD and this is what it looks like? What was I doing? For me, when I look back, the 20 years that I was in working in corporations, and I worked in some really big enterprises in Canada. Uh, I was at the right place at the right time, almost. I started my career young in one of the major telcos here in Canada, and it's tech, it's innovative, it's constantly changing, it's new, it's exciting. I was in sales and then moved into marketing, so I was really in an environment where it was good for my ADHD to be in that fast paced rapid change. And I know, it's interesting because you hear sometimes that people will jump careers, people with ADHD jump careers a lot. The first organization I worked at, it's a massive enterprise. So when I look back, every 2 years within that organization, I was changing roles. So I was kind of, coping and moving through it without really knowing about my ADHD. However, there were days where I would sit down and feel the burnout. and not understand what was happening. And I would have some, I would sabotage certain things in myself. I would, impulsively do things that really I shouldn't have been doing, jumping project to project, getting frustrated when I wasn't heard, and that comes from that impulsivity and control. Um, so yeah, the telltale signs were there. There was one thing though for me is when I would sit in boardrooms where everybody was talking, and I loved, I'm the idea person, I'm the generator, like let's think of ideas, and I would have 20 ideas. And then I would get frustrated because I'm like, okay, well, let's do it. And everybody's like, no, we need a work back schedule. We need this, we need that. So for me, that let's just go do it, and not meeting people where they were at, now that I look back, and it would frustrate me. And now I understand why it was the way it was. And also the other thing that really stood out for me is some of my colleagues were so calm and collective in certain meetings, and they would just, we'd all be frustrated. I would show that frustration facially. I would even walk out of meetings. I did that towards the end of my corporate career. I walked out of one meeting, not a proud moment, but and others would just sit there and bite their tongue and not say anything. And to me, I was like, why are you not speaking up? And that goes to emotional regulation, and for some of us with ADHD, emotional regulation is not a natural thing. It takes a lot of effort and work. So those were some of the things that showed up for me.
It's so true, because I do feel so frustrated sometimes, and I don't understand why I'm so frustrating. While I see other people like just calm, and maybe they want to kill the other person inside, but me, it's just all physical, you know. It's like everything is become physical while other person can just think about it. So what were you doing? I know that you were leaving the place because it was not good for you. I'm doing the same thing sometimes. When I don't feel good, I'm just leaving instead of just showing my frustration, you know. I'm going to
Mhm.
scream outside, you know. So when you are in the workplace and you have ADHD, you have to manage that. So what will be your tips to manage frustration?
Yeah, that's a great question. Knowing what I know now, after my diagnosis, I went into this extensive learning and knowing everything about ADHD. I'm sure every one of us who's been diagnosed, we hyper focus into, okay, how do I fix it? And we went from that fix it mode to learning how to live with it, how to get along with it. So through a lot of coach training, working with coaches, with mentors, I learned along the way the different ways of regulating my emotions. One thing for me, I would say, is when you find yourself in those situations where you are frustrated, and you are rightfully frustrated, and you see the problem and you want to speak up, I like to say is take that deep breath and come from a place of, am I trying to control the situation, or is this something that these folks will eventually get there on their own terms, in their own speed? And every one of us has a journey, and every one of us has a speed that we're all going through. And just kind of come from that compassionate lens, right? To know that some people are afraid to speak up. Some people don't have the language to speak up. And some of us, the emotional dysregulation gets the best of us. And really pick your battles, right? Pick and choose when you really want to, be that Joan of Arc and fight the good fight. And when it's really like, you know what, I'm just going to reflect on this, I'm going to collect my thoughts, because how many times do we, after the meeting, after that phone call, you could have said it differently, right? So it's, the pause doesn't come naturally to us, and I encourage that practicing it, of just take that deep breath, calm your nervous system down. It's in that moment of stress, your amygdala is hijacked, your brain is all like haywire, you're seeing blood, you're not hearing anything. So really be in your physical body and notice the emotion first, right?
Yeah.
And it sounds easy, Melly, but with practice, I think the biggest trigger for me is am I coming from a place of control, or am I coming from a place of compassionate, first for yourself, and then for those around you, to really hold the space for them, that they also, in their time, they will speak up eventually, and you don't have to be the first one to always save the day.
It's true. And at the same time, while we're talking about emotion regulation, it can be about anything, you know, it can be you have to work you have to work 8 to 9 or whatever you have a long shift at work, and at the end of the last 2 hours you're like you don't want to work anymore, or you
Mhm.
feel frustrated because you're so tired, but you still need to be here because you need your paycheck and your boss is counting on you. Mainly if you work with public, you know, you cannot just leave because you want to leave if you're not a self
Yes.
worker, you know. So what happened to you in those moments, you know, when you're too tired or your brain does not want to function properly because you're tired or you just cannot, caffeine doesn't work anymore, right?
Mm-mm. No, you're right. And when I look back at when my little one was 5 months and when I went back to work, I honestly had no business going back to work when you're so sleep deprived.
Yeah.
But nobody tells you those things. And unfortunately, with certain cultures, certain way that we are in this society, it's this hustle. It's just go and do. And I wish more women even would speak up about motherhood, and it is a full-time and a half job in itself. And sleep deprivation on a typical brain does damage, and it really debilitates you, let alone when you're a mother and trying to be a mom and then coming to work with that sleep deprivation. So for me, the biggest thing I talk about these days is be selfish with your cognitive resources. So from the moment you're waking up, there's a certain amount of resources your brain has to give you for the rest of your day. And that's why we fall asleep, to kind of refuel,
Yes.
to recalibrate, and all of that good stuff. So be selfish with that and see throughout the day. It's the phone surfing, it's the conversations you're having. All of those are taken away from your cognitive resources. And as it's taken away from those resources, the energy goes down, it goes down, it goes down. So my biggest thing is throughout the day, be mindful of the activities you get yourself involved in, the conversations you get yourself involved in, to really keep yourself at this, a safe place. And also honor that the battery is running low, got to go do something else, got to just even walking away from your activity for 5 minutes to just let it all soak in, kind of, rebalancing yourself, your emotions, everything. That 5 minute disconnect does help us. It's just a matter of, I think with us ADHDers, we're so caught up in that stimulation, like looking for that next hit, looking for that next hit, because we're dopamine deficient and it's constantly looking for that thing. I think the detriment of that is then we're not slowing down to let this brain kind of keep up with us, to come back up again.
For me, the tips, because I'm a cashier. I'm going to go work after that show. I'm doing that because to finance the ADHD Millie show. At this time, I'm going to go work like 2 days a week, and and for me, the best tips I have for myself is take toilet breaks.
Yes, I say that too. Yeah.
So people think I'm
Brilliant.
going too often to the washroom, but at the same time, it feels so good for for my brain to have at least 2 minutes of no client, no distraction, and just breathe a little bit.
That is brilliant, Melly. I love it. I'm glad you said it, because I always say, just go sit on the toilet without your phone, without anything. Just sit there. That's amazing.
Yeah, I try not to take too much time because you're going to get some complaint, but
Yeah.
I at least go to a gym at least 5 times, and sometimes nobody just see it because there's no client or something like
And
that, you
Melly,
know?
what you're saying there too, it's because of the kind of environment you're working in, is also the sensory and the stimulation and all the hustle and bustle that's going on. All of that takes a toll on our brain too, right? It's kind of like, when I'm in a car with my husband and he's talking to me and the baby is talking and the radio is on. It's a nightmare because we can't tune it out, because everything comes at us at the same time. So really, that bathroom break, whether you
Yeah.
have to go or not, is very useful. So
Yeah, and at the same time, when I'm too tired, I get some complaint that I'm too like a robot, you know? I'm scanning, co- receipt, how do you want to pay, you know? I'm not emotional connect to the person I have in front of me. That can be a problem when you have ADHD, because you try to just focus on one task,
Yeah.
is to have this client paid, you know. And
Yeah.
I'm giving the example of the cashier, but it can be anything else. It can be like at the phone or something like that. You try to get focused, but at the same time you need to have some interaction with the person too, and sometimes that's very hard. So what will be your tips to be able to being able to do your work, but at the same time give some attention that the client for you needs, you know?
Oh, Melly, that's a tricky one. Let me think about that, because it's the same as whether you're in a meeting and you're having a conversation like this, because you want to also make sure you're not thinking two steps ahead of them and you want to be present.
Yes.
Or whether, you're at the cashier register and, trying to pay attention. I think in that case, this goes back to self-awareness. And with practice, you'd be able to kind of know and be gentle with yourself. Like, we don't have to be perfect, because also in this society of distracted people, the person standing in front of you is also distracted too with whatever it is they're doing. So it's this bit of just be mindful of a gentle conversation. How's your day going? Hope you're having a good day. Just that human connection. Now more than ever, we need that, is to just acknowledge their existence, I think. Um, if anything, that, they're not just another, machine coming by and paying your stuff.
They're
It's,
not a number.
yeah, and it's really because, and I see that, I mean, actually that happened to me yesterday at a coffee shop. And I felt for the person, because she was just like, here's your coffee, here's your donut. And there was no conversation. I'm like, okay. And then for a second there, I was like, how rude. But then at the same time, you never know what's going on with the other person. You never know what kind of a day they're having. So it's just that taking that 1 second of acknowledging their existence, I think, Melly, is what I would say to that. And if in meetings like this, when there's a conversation, be curious about them instead of what you want to say next. It's asking questions, and what do you mean by that, and what do you mean by that. And really, for ADHDers, again, that's not a natural thing to do, because we go into problem solving mode right away and we want to help them. And I would like to say with that is, pause the helping. Now more than ever, people need to be listened to. So the more listening we do, it's that in itself is a service to the other person.
So if we're going to the listen mode, because when you have ADHD, it's hard to just not only stay focused on the conversation, but you to just listen to them, and not only understand the conversation, because your brain wants to go somewhere else. You know, for me, I got a lot of tips to be able to focus on a conversation now, but for a long time it was so hard for me to just focus on that person, what they're saying, because I will be listening, but I will not understand necessarily, because my brain is somewhere else. I'm sure is something that you acknowledge sometime with ADHD, you know. So what it will be your tips to just, you said breathe and just listen, but sometimes it's just hard to listen, you know. So what will you do in those moments?
That's a good point, because there are times where we just kind of space out. They say something and then the brain goes. And it's not that we're doing it intentionally. It happens. When you're catching yourself in that moment, it's to just be genuinely like human about it. I'm sorry, and even not even sorry, is could you just repeat that last bit? Because here's the trick with that. And I see this more often with ADHDers. When we want to make a point, as I'm trying to make a point right now, we sometimes verbal process too much to get to the point. So if that person is talking, because they're also processing what they want to say before they actually get to the damn point. So it's catch the last part of what they're saying. So ask them to repeat the last part, because probably what they said was the build up to the last part. That's the important part. So that way they don't have to feel like they need to explain the whole thing to you again, because there's always a story behind a point, right? And for some of us, it's just like so painful, but also it's a double-edged sword, because we do it to them too. We give lengthy stories to get to the point. So it's this even, like, fair game that we can play. But also, so it's that really the point I'm trying to make is ask the question, that last bit that you just said, can you repeat it again, or can you say it in a different way so that it really sinks in, right? And I think that's where the person says, okay, they were listening, but they want me to tell it in a different way. So then that actually re-engages your brain, because there is this side of our brain, the default mode network, where it kind of starts to wander off. And even the person is sitting in front of you, it's gone. It's gone. It's glitchy. So by asking that question, you're reactivating your brain again to come back to the world.
Yeah, you have to put it on point, and sometimes I do feel so frustrated because they were talking and they're never stopping, and I'm like, my brain is tired of hearing about you, and sometimes you can be a little bit not nice, and you don't want to be not nice, but it's just happening because I get so many information and I'm like, please just shut up, please, 2 seconds, and it's not because you don't like that person, it's just because you just can't anymore.
Yeah. And there's another thing we do in coaching is to remind the person of, so I just want to gently pause for a second, lovingly pause you for a second. You can use words like that and say, you're telling me this story. How does it relate to the point you're trying to make? And it almost gives the person this little bit of a nudge, like, get to the point. Right. And it also recalibrates the other person too. So they feel like, okay, yeah, you're right, I need to get to the point, because they know they've gone off tangent.
Yeah, it's true. And I have a comment of Paul McDonald, and I think he's really right when he says that ADHD make great bosses, but not alone. Because for me, it's better to have a team than being alone. Because when you're alone, you're like, have all the hats, and sometimes some of the hats are not the best one. Like for me, the worst hats that I have is it's complaint department. Okay, this for me is like the worst hats ever. And sometimes when you have a business, it can happen, complaints. It's not because you did a bad job, but sometimes clients are like that. There's something that was not perfect with them. And yes, yes, they're doing great boss, but not alone, for my opinion. So what do you think?
Yeah. So, as much as I agree with Paul, there's a little bit of a nuance to that too. And I see this with some of the clients that I coach. Some of them are in leadership positions, they're executives, they have teams. And even for myself, when I look back at when I had large teams, I kind of want to go back to all my team and be like, I'm sorry. The reason I say the sorry part is because our brain goes like, it's a Lamborghini down the Autobahn in Germany. It has no speed limit. It's going fast. And if you have a team and you're leading that team, if you're going too fast, there is this unspoken of, okay, the boss said there's 20, projects, there's 20 ideas coming out. And it's giving the space to your team to know that some of the stuff that I'm saying, we don't have to do it all. We can do 3 of it. We can do 2 of it. So really have that open conversation with your team about, how many projects do we have to do? And not everything I say needs to be done. And they don't have to keep up with us, because if some of us are hyperactive bosses, that really affects our team. We can drain them. Not everybody can keep up with a hyperactive ADD, right? So it's that balance of really taming how you show up for your team. But also, I can tell you, we are highly compassionate. We are highly cooperative. So we do make really good bosses because we really care about our team. So that's a good point, Paul.
Because yes, I actually think that I'm a bossy person sometimes, and I'm not doing that to be bad, or to stress out my team or anything, but I'm just saying this needs to be done, this needs to be done. And sometimes I'm saying like that, and sometimes you need to formulate some words to make it, we should do this, instead of that needs to be done now. And you're like so hyperactive sometimes, and you're just like, where should I focus? I'm draining my team. What I should do, It's
Yeah.
very hard sometimes. I wonder who's the linking user. Can you please say your name in the comment, because I cannot see your name and I would like to thank you personally.
Oh, thanks for the nice compliments, you guys. And feel free to ask any questions. But I do think, Melly, we're about like 20 seconds delay. So by the time they post, we see it 20 seconds later.
Yes, actually, yeah. So there's an audiobook that you propose. That's cool. Thank you so much for sharing that audiobook. Is it on Audible? Because I really love Audible, because for me it's like so easier for me to listen to a book than reading it, because again my brain can go this way to this way and this way. In reading a book for me is almost impossible. I have so many books, but I cannot finish one because it's so hard. So my other question will be, how can you focus on the project, because it's a little bit like a book, you have some steps to follow to be able to end the project. So how do you do that?
Mm. That took some unconditioning. I had to part from certain behaviors that I had developed over the years. And I think for those of us late in life diagnosed with ADHD, we have created our own coping mechanism, our own systems throughout the years, not knowing about ADHD. So for me, it took some unconditioning, because for me to focus on projects, I was doing like multiple projects at the same time. Right, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and I was like, yes, I'm the queen of multitasking, and I, wore the T-shirt. I love multitasking, and that's not really good, actually. So there's research, there's studies, there's so many things about. I call it mindful tasking, and really, it's, and I know it's kind of a painful when we say focus on one thing at a time. And the awesome book by Gary Keller, that The One Thing, truly is a good book for anybody with ADHD. And the reason I say focus on one thing at a time is so you can continue to sharpen the other side of your brain that's into activation, into doing. The more you're doing multitasking when it comes to projects, it almost becomes weaker, because you're just giving this bad behavior to it. Yeah. But when you go into one task at a time, one project at a time, one focus at a time, over time, this is a new behavior that you're creating, and it does get easier, and your brain starts to actually want to crave it. So these days I actually crave one task at a time. So for me, the focus is, let's say if I'm working on my podcast for that day, it just becomes a podcast day. And that's all I'm doing. I'm editing, I'm interviewing, I'm doing the script, all of that stuff. So it's a day of podcasting. And it goes back to conserving your cognitive resources again. How many things that all these different things you do throughout the day drains you. And by 2 p.m., you have that, traditional crash that we all do. It's because of that. So it's really, for me to say, for focus, one thing at a time. And I know some of you will cringe into that, but I've seen it work. I see it work with my clients. Over time, you get used to this new way of one thing at a time. Even on my computer, on my desktop, even on my desk, it's one project at a time in front of me, just so that visually I see that one thing. Does that answer you, or is it too like, Cathy, whatever?
No, it's perfect. But sometimes, you will focus too much on that project, and you won't want to do the other thing the other days. You will want a month complete of that project, but sometimes you need to be able to, one day is that project, the other day is the other project, because I am a website designer too. I have 2 to 3 clients. I cannot do only one client the entire week, because the other client is going to ask me why nothing is changed.
Yeah.
So how do you keep it? Like, how can I explain that? How do you make it work to be able to just not be so hyper-focused? Because we can be so hyper-focused on something and we don't want to stop it, So
yes,
how do you manage that?
That's a great point, Melly, because that is our reality too, is then, and I'm not advocating for hyper-focus, because the other side of hyper-focus, if we're in it for too long, the other side of it is depression, it's burnout, because your brain shouldn't be that hyper-focused for that long. It actually, it's like a recent conversation and I forget her name, the author of Discrimination. She talks about too much dopamine is also not good for you. And with hyperfocus comes a lot of that. And so what I do, Melly, I strategically time block my day. So that's the other piece. But I do it in a not the traditional time blocking that's out there. Like there's different resources on how to time block your day. I really look for how my energy is showing up the day before, the day after, that day. So these like the day before and the day after really dictate how I go through my weeks. So I really honor my energy. So for today, for example, I have you on my calendar. I have only one coaching client and I have one meeting. That's my capacity because this hour takes a lot out of me, right? I love it. I'm stimulated, but then I'm going to be like, oh, thank God it's over. Right? So it's really, for me, it's like 3 days at a time, just so I can kind of see what's happening. I remember I was working with a client and Mondays were really draining for this person. And then when we looked at his Sundays, Sunday was a whole lot of family stuff. And all of that family stuff that was in there really moved over because it would take up all of his energy, all of his resources. So it made sense that Mondays weren't as productive. And really understanding that, Melly, too, it gives you a little bit more permission to say, okay, what's realistic for getting things done today? What does it look like? How much brain juice do I have? And then picking and choosing the things that are like quick and let's get her done, or the things that are deeper work, really scheduling that. So I am a lot of it comes to mindset too, how you show up, how you feel about things, right? And some things, and as an entrepreneur, the other side of your life is the outsourcing part. Eventually putting yourself in this place of some things just need to be outsourced. And I don't have to be the jack of all trades. You know, it could just be a few things that you're really good at and just outsource the rest of it.
So what will be my tips? Because Sam here said that she sometimes forget to eat, sleep,
Yes.
etc. So if you have the difficulty to eat or simply doing sport, it can be anything like that. What I will suggest is to put in your planner with time that you need to eat and the time you need to sleep,
Yes.
or simply having a nap that's going to tell you when is the time to sleep or the time to eat. In which one app that I really love is Softaculous. I'm going to put the link in the comment after the show, because here on Restream I cannot put a comment on LinkedIn. I don't know why, but I can put it on YouTube and Twitch, but not here. So what I really love is Softaculous, because it's not too expensive, but it's not free neither. It's like 10 days. I think it's for free if you want to try it. It's going to give you some alarms of the things that you have to do, some habits that you need to do. And for me, it's so important that you eat each time at the same time, and you sleep at the same time, you wake up at the same time. If you have a small routine, I know the ADHD people don't like routine, but you need to force yourself in one to ensure your body to rest perfectly. And it's okay if you want to take 2 hour break in the afternoon if your brain does not want to work anymore. It's okay to finish at 6 instead of 5. It's totally fine. And the other tips I will give you is to take one day off. I mean, really off. No thinking about work, no thinking about business. Don't plan, don't do anything else than just relax. Even if you have a family, you just tell your children, today, Sunday, it's relaxed time. Watch movies, read books. We don't go out, going to the zoo and stuff like that. We just stay at home and we relax. If you want to do something, it's going to be Saturday. I'm giving you an example like that. It can be any days of the week. It can be Wednesday if you're a self worker and you need a break in the middle of the week. It doesn't matter. So yeah, that will be my tips.
Great ones. I love them all. I love that one day off. Paul says, how do you cope with change when you have such a structure? If you're talking about me, Paul, I don't have a rigid structure, actually. And I don't believe in a rigid structure because we're human beings. Life happens. I'm a mom to a little 5-year-old now. All of a sudden, COVID happens and things change. It's For me, my core thing is about know your rhythm, know your how you're showing up, know your energy, get to know yourself in that way, and adjust and go ebb and flow with that, as opposed to when people come to me and say, I want coaching because I want to be structured and I want to have routine, I'm like, I'm not your coach. Because it's not about that. It's not about structure and routine. We'll get there eventually. I'll tell you, my sleep pattern is regulated because I have a child. It's because of her that I'm able to go to bed at 11, wake up at 7:30. That never used to be the case, but my life, it kind of like it, she molded me into that routine. So it's really about certain routines. Life will put you into it, and some of them you just kind of ebb and flow as you go, and honor the change. We're all human beings. There's no perfection in this, and as ADHDers, it needs to change. It should change because we kind of like change. It can't be always the same boring stuff. So
It's about balance, right?
yeah.
So I was wondering if you guys have some question for me and Katie. We're going probably to stop the show at in 10 minutes. So if you have any question, you can prepare your question and we're going to be so happy to answer them. So you can go away. You can go with that now if you're ready. And
Melly, I want to ask you something.
Sure.
Based on some of these conversations you've had and some of the guests you have, what are some of the insights you're getting out of, ADHD in the workplace? What are you seeing there?
I'm seeing that a lot of ADHD people change job constantly, or simply they're getting fired because of what they are, or because they're not capable to adapt as quick as a normal person. That's my experience, and I've seen a lot of people having that experience. And I also find that anxiety is something that happens or occur with ADHD, and sometimes it's happening because of all the pressure of the outside world. It's a little bit, it's not autistic ADHD, but there's a lot of similitude with the social environment and stuff like that. It's not the same, but there's a lot of similarity with both neurodivergence. See, so yeah, so that's what I see a lot. And sometimes people just are tired faster too, and they don't really know how to process that. That's what I seeing the most. And sometimes people try to be entrepreneur too, as they cannot find a job that's suitable for them, and they just abandon the idea of ever finding an employer that wants to hire them, or they are wondering if they should say they are ADHD at work. That will be my other question. For you, should we say that we have ADHD or autism when we start a new job? Should we say that, or we should keep it for ourselves?
Oh man, this is such a
I put it back a question to you.
Yeah, and it's a good question, and it's a big question because there's so many different ways to go about that, right? Depending on the type of job it is, depending on your role. In some cases, you do want to disclose because of the role. In some cases, it's the discrimination. Unfortunately, I remember when I was diagnosed and I told one of my peers that I was ADHD, I was diagnosed with ADHD. They were like, shh, don't talk about it. Don't be public about it. I'm like, what are you talking about? And they're like, no, there's a stigma in the workplace. I was that naive to not realize, because I'm not a judgmental person in that, like if somebody has there's differences, fine. We're all human at the end of the day. So unfortunately, the stigma is there. What I would say is, I want to say is ask for accommodations that you absolutely need to be able to function. And you don't necessarily, and this is my humble opinion, there could be other ways of saying this. In my situation, what I've seen is ask for the accommodations that help you get through what you need to do, the tasks that you need to do. So for example, if you're in an open space environment, if I ever was to go back into corporate, I cannot sit too close to a window because I have light sensory issues. If it's too bright, I just can't operate. I can't have too many windows around me. So for me, that would be asking for that kind of an accommodation. And I don't have to say it's because of my ADHD. It's no, this is how I process information. This is how I show up. And that's just the way it is. So it's really owning the things that you need in order to operate and get through your day. And then also to look inside of yourself and say, what are the things that are within my control? What else can I address? What else can I manage to show up as my best self? Sometimes we're too quick to put the responsibility on others. And I'm not saying that all of us do that. It's just for a second, step back and say, what are your major things that are non-negotiable, and some of the things that you can just a little bit modify, and just having that even mentality around it, I think it's helpful. If somebody is a fidgeter and they're
Yeah.
constantly click, 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 and say, okay, I'm ADHD, I have to fidget and I'm clicking. Like at some point that gets annoying. So come up with a different fidgeting toy. It's knowing that certain things, we also have to kind of manage our ADHD as well. And one of my friends says, so you don't ADHD all over the place. So I hope that answers it, because there's different ways to have this conversation. So this is one way, I guess, for me to say it.
This is a nice fidget that I have. It's like a
There
wait for
you
the ends.
go.
You just do this and no sound. I use it all in the show. No one notices it. No sound, no nothing, and that's great. And at the same time, I do agree with what you say because of the stigma at the workplace, and you shouldn't say everything, all your challenges to the entire world. But the reason why I create the ADHD Melly show is because I want to talk about it. I want more people in the world that know that ADHD
Yes.
exists, and we can work as much as anyone else, that we are intelligent like anyone else. But yes, we do need accommodation, and sometimes we're so scared of going to the workplace because we're not used to be so distracted. And yeah, some people will get fired because they've never been to an environment with so much noise, or they don't know they cannot be in the kitchen, at Subways, because it's too fast. You just cannot do it.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't know how to which kind of work that will be fitting for you, and that's quite hard to just manage that. Some people is going to be good in those areas and some people won't. So yeah, so that's
And I
why
love
I
what you're saying there, Melly, because one of the things, it's about find the right fit for the job, right? Sometimes out of desperation, we'll say yes to any job that comes our way. And if it's really not a fit, that mentality of, work till you're like retire from the same job is gone long ago. So you don't have to stay in the same job. And I almost feel like, it's like dating. You date till you find the right person that's a fit. And you don't have to marry everybody and then get divorced and then get married again and then get divorced. Give yourself the permission to, you're experiencing life, you're seeing what it is, but also start with, what are your non-negotiables? What are your standards? What are you looking for in a career? What are your must-haves? For me, the biggest one, the person you're reporting to, that boss will make or break your job, right? People leave because of shitty bosses. They don't leave because of the work environment. It's the boss usually is the first
yeah.
one. So really interview that person. Really, do you want to work with this person? Is this the person that inspires you? And I think that one, and then the accommodations, everything else will work itself out, I think. I'm too optimistic sometimes, but I believe that.
Yeah, it's true. So Sam has a question. How do you manage shiny object syndrome or distraction? Some days it feels like I'm the queen of procrastination. Example, today I cleaned my kitchen instead of writing my book and practicing my TEDx talk. TED
Oh,
talk.
yes, yes. This one, like, we could do a whole other episode on this whole topic. I think with that, with procrastination, with any new object, um, with procrastination, the root of it is what's underneath that procrastination. And most of the time for us, it's I don't know where to start. I don't know what step one looks like, or I don't know what the next steps after that look like. or I'm not really bought into this, so I'm going to procrastinate till I feel like it's the right thing to do. So there's many different ways of that procrastination shows up for us. Actually, in my podcast, I do have an episode on procrastination. So then what we tend to do to kind of get our dopamine going, to get stimulated, let me go do something else, because that's something else, I'll finish the task. Yes, there's been days where I've scrubbed the floors where I didn't need to, but it's the task complete. And it's like, see, I can do that task, but I don't want to do the other one. So it's really understanding what's the root cause of that procrastination. And in some cases, I like to call it, for me, I call it marination. And it's, I intentionally on certain things, I will procrastinate because I know there's something that needs to be resolved in between. And it's through that balance, that time. And actually, Adam Grant has an awesome TED talk on this about how sometimes procrastination is a good thing. It's where innovation comes through. But if you do too much of it, then it goes into inaction. So long story short, there's different ways of approaching it, but really have that conversation with yourself to say, what's underneath this? What is it that's getting in my way of starting it? Sometimes even a conversation with a friend out loud to say, this is what I'm procrastinating. As soon as you start having the conversation, you're like, oh, okay, I'm good. I can now go do. And sometimes it's doing the task with somebody else. Body doubling, that one works a lot for us with ADHDers, is we work with somebody else, they're online, we're online, we get work done, and then it's done. So sometimes it's not as in depth of a reason as to why we procrastinate. And yeah, I like what Paul says, like to work to the deadline or no. Yeah, I create deadlines for myself whenever I'm doing talks, whenever I'm doing podcast episodes. I create imaginary deadlines. I owe it to other people, and it gets done.
I always have deadline too, because seriously, if I don't, I'm like I decided I was going to finish my Indiegogo campaign, at least the draft, so somebody could correct it, and make sure everything will be fine. But I gave myself a deadline for yesterday, and I finished it yesterday, because if you don't give yourself a deadline, you will never finish it. Seriously,
That's right.
It's impossible for me to finish something without a deadline. And I do. At the same time, ADHD are affected by stress, but at the same time, there's good stress, the good dopamine that's coming from a project that's going to be finished, and it's going to be perfect to show to the world. So that dopamine is I crave that dopamine. That's why deadline is essential.
So good. And Dr. Hallowell says, find your right difficult. And when you find that just the right amount of difficulty, then it's like, okay, I want to get this done. And sometimes when it's way too easy, it's like, oh, it's not there. I don't feel like it.
So Sam said, yes, when I used to work for other people, I will interview my bosses. When they ask me, give me an example of when you solve a problem, I would come back with the answer and ask them, can you give me an example of when you have support one of your team? It was an effective way to filter out people if they were a good fit or not.
That's a good question. Yeah. Get to know the other person. Yeah.
Exactly. So, guys, we're going to leave, and I'm going to give Cathy the ending word. How do you want to end this?
With one word?
Not necessarily
with a thought.
Yeah, with a thought. Sorry.
With a thought, I would say, for me, the biggest thing is get to know your brain. Get to know your unique ADHD, because at the end of the day, Melly is different than me, and then Sam, then Paul. All of us on here who are ADHD, we're all in our own unique way, a certain flavor of it. So get to know yourself. Get to know your brain, become your own self-observer, get to know your patterns, and kind of reassess what are some of the things that are serving you, what are some of the things that you really love about you, and how can you replace the other ones. And I always say, don't do ADHD alone. Find a mentor, find a coach, find a therapist, find a community, build your own support network that you can add a phone call, because there's days where ADHD really kicks your butt and you're down in the ground and you're like, I can't. Those are the days where you lean into your support network and just, ask them to remind you of how kick-ass you are, because I know all of us are kick-ass. So it's that really, and comes from self-compassion. So those are the things I would say is, don't do ADHD alone, get to know it. And it's, you are just as kick-ass as anybody else. It's all about, self-compassion, one day at a time.
Yes, because when you think about it, it takes a lifetime to really know yourself, right? And ADHD is one part of yourself that you will need a lot of time to know. And it's okay if you do mistake, guys, okay? You learning about yourself, and there's word you can say when something doesn't work. I'm sorry, it's words that you can use as much often as you need to be used. And yeah, that will help you a lot, trust me. So thank you so much, guys, for being here. Thanks, Kitty, to be here. And I hope to see you next time. And next Friday, we're going to launch the Indiegogo campaign. So I'm so excited. I'm going to put the link down below when I finish the show. And thank you so much again.
Thank you, Mally.
Thank you.
Bye.